The morning sun had barely risen over the cornfields when Thomas woke up. His alarm clock showed 5:30 a.m., but he had already been half awake, listening to the distant sound of his father working outside. Their small farmhouse sat on 10 acres of land that had been in their family for 3 generations. Thomas rubbed his eyes and quickly got dressed in worn jeans and a faded blue t-shirt. Outside, his father Robert was already fixing the irrigation system that had broken down yesterday. The tall man with weathered hands turned when he heard Thomas approaching. "Morning, son. Sorry about all this. I know you've got that big test today." Thomas shook his head. "It's fine, Dad. Farm comes first. Always has." Together they worked for the next 2 hours, their hands getting muddy as they repaired the pipes that would water their crops. This wasn't just chores, it was survival. Since Thomas's mother had passed away 3 years ago, the farm had struggled to stay afloat. Robert worked odd jobs in town, while Thomas balanced his schoolwork with farm duties. By the time they finished, Thomas was already late for school. He quickly washed up, grabbed his backpack, and jumped on his old bicycle. "I'll try to make it for at least part of the test," he called back to his father. The ride to Pinewood High School took 20 minutes, with Thomas pedaling as fast as he could. His heart sank when he saw the empty hallways. Class had started over an hour ago. He quietly entered Mrs. Patterson's history classroom, where students were hunched over their test papers. Mrs. Patterson, a thin woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, looked up from her desk. Her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Well, look who decided to join us," she announced loudly, making every student look up. "Thomas Jones late again." Thomas stood awkwardly at the door, his clothes still carrying traces of dirt from the morning's work. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. We had a problem with the irrigation system, and I had to help my father." Mrs. Patterson stood up, crossing her arms. "That's the 3rd time this month you've used your farm as an excuse. This is a history test worth 30% of your grade." "I understand. I was hoping I could still take it, even with reduced time," Thomas said quietly. The teacher's voice grew colder. "This isn't a restaurant where you show up whenever you want. Education requires commitment. Perhaps your priorities lie elsewhere." A few students looked uncomfortable at the exchange. Thomas's friend Daniel tried to catch his eye supportively. "My family needs the farm to survive," Thomas explained. "I'm doing my best to manage both." "Well, your best isn't good enough," Mrs. Patterson said. "I've had enough of these excuses. You've missed too many classes, too many assignments. I'm recommending your expulsion. Please leave my classroom immediately." A shocked silence fell over the room. Thomas stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. "But Mrs. Patterson," he started. "Out. Now. I'll be speaking with Principal Wilson right after this class." Thomas slowly backed out of the classroom, his face burning with humiliation. He sat on a bench in the empty hallway, his mind racing. How would he tell his father? College had been their shared dream, a way for Thomas to build a better future while still helping with the farm. Later that afternoon, Thomas sat in Principal Wilson's office as the man signed the expulsion papers without even looking up. "Mrs. Patterson is one of our most respected teachers," the principal said. "If she says you're not committed to your education, I have no reason to doubt her judgment." As Thomas walked out of school that day, carrying his few belongings from his locker, he had no idea that someone had recorded Mrs. Patterson's public humiliation. He had no way of knowing that by tomorrow morning, his life would change in ways he couldn't imagine, starting with the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the sky. Thomas walked home slowly that afternoon, the weight of the expulsion papers heavy in his backpack. The 5-mile journey gave him plenty of time to think about how he would break the news to his father. The sun was setting by the time he reached the gravel driveway leading to their modest farmhouse. His father was sitting on the porch steps, a worried look on his face. "You're late," Robert said, standing up. "I was getting worried." Thomas couldn't meet his father's eyes. "Dad, something happened at school today." Before Thomas could continue, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Then it buzzed again. And again. Confused, he pulled it out to find dozens of notifications flooding in. "What's going on?" his father asked, moving closer. Thomas opened one of the messages from his friend Daniel. It was a link to a video that was already spreading across social media. With shaking hands, Thomas pressed play. The video showed everything. Mrs. Patterson publicly humiliating him, Thomas explaining about helping on the farm, and the unfair expulsion. Someone in class had recorded the whole exchange. The video had already been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from people outraged by the treatment Thomas had received. "Dad, look at this," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert watched the video, his expression changing from confusion to anger to a strange sort of pride as he heard his son's respectful responses despite the teacher's harsh treatment. "You handled yourself well, son," Robert said, putting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Better than I might have." That night, neither of them slept much. Thomas's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages of support from classmates, community members, and even strangers. The video had been picked up by local news sites, and by midnight, it had reached over 1 million views. Unknown to Thomas, the video had also caught the attention of people far beyond their small farming town. In a luxury hotel room hundreds of miles away, action movie star Vin Diesel was scrolling through his phone after a long day of filming when the video appeared on his feed. He watched it once, then again. Something about Thomas's situation struck a deep chord with him. Vin had grown up poor, raised by a single father, and had faced his own struggles before finding success. He immediately called his assistant. "Find out everything you can about this kid and the school," he said, "and get the helicopter ready for tomorrow morning." Back at the farm, Thomas finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., unaware that his story had reached someone with both the means and motivation to help. He woke up to even more notifications and a call from Daniel. "Dude, you need to come to school right now," Daniel said, his voice excited and breathless. "I got expelled, remember?" Thomas replied groggily. "Trust me, you want to be here. Everyone's talking about you, and the principal looks like he's about to have a heart attack from all the calls the school's getting." Thomas got dressed and hopped on his bike, curious despite his dread. As he neared the school, he noticed something strange. Almost all the students were outside in the parking lot and sports field, looking up at the sky. Then he heard it, the distinctive whomp-whomp-whomp of helicopter blades cutting through the air. A sleek black helicopter with a familiar logo on its side was circling the school grounds, preparing to land on the football field. Thomas braked his bike hard, nearly falling off as he watched in disbelief. His friend Daniel rushed over, practically jumping with excitement. "Is that who I think it is?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the helicopter. Daniel nodded, his eyes wide. "Vin Diesel. And he's here because of you. Your video went mega viral overnight. Everyone's seen it, even him." As the helicopter touched down and the door opened, Thomas stood frozen, watching as one of the biggest movie stars in the world stepped onto his school's football field. And he was walking straight toward the growing crowd, his eyes scanning faces until they locked with Thomas's. The helicopter's blades slowly stopped spinning as a hush fell over the crowd of students. Thomas stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. This couldn't be real. Famous action star Vin Diesel was walking across his school's football field, flanked by 3 serious-looking people in business suits. Principal Wilson rushed out of the building, his face a mixture of confusion and panic. He straightened his tie and plastered on a smile as he approached the celebrity. "Mr. Diesel, what an unexpected honor. Had we known you were coming, we would have prepared a proper welcome," the principal said, extending his hand. Vin Diesel gave the principal a brief handshake but kept scanning the crowd. When his eyes found Thomas, he walked straight past the principal. The crowd of students parted like water as the movie star approached. "Thomas Jones?" Vin asked in his distinctive deep voice. Thomas could only nod, his mouth suddenly dry. "I saw what happened to you yesterday. Mind if we talk?" The famous actor's tone was friendly but determined. By now, phones were out everywhere, recording this unbelievable moment. Thomas noticed Mrs. Patterson standing at the school entrance, her face pale as she watched the scene unfold. "Sure," Thomas managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "Great. First, I'd like you to meet my team." Vin gestured to the people behind him. "This is my lawyer, Lisa, my education advocate, Mr. Chen, and my personal assistant, Ray." The lawyer stepped forward. "Thomas, the video of your expulsion raises several legal concerns about how the school handled your situation. With your permission, we'd like to address this with the administration. Thomas glanced at Daniel, who was nodding enthusiastically beside him. Yes, that would be good. Then he added, but my dad should probably be here too. Already taken care of, Vin said with a small smile. My team called your father this morning. He should be arriving any minute. As if on cue, Thomas heard the sound of their old pickup truck pulling into the school parking lot. His father stepped out, looking both confused and amazed at the scene before him. Dad, Thomas called out, waving him over. Robert Jones walked cautiously toward the gathering, his work boots crunching on the grass of the football field. Thomas, what's going on here? He asked, eyes wide as he recognized the famous actor. Vin Diesel extended his hand. Mr. Jones, I'm a big fan of hard-working fathers. Your son's situation hit close to home for me. Robert shook his hand, still looking bewildered. Thank you, but why exactly are you here? Because what happened to your son isn't right, Vin said firmly. I grew up with a working father who struggled to make ends meet. I know what it's like to balance family responsibilities with school. The education advocate, Mr. Chen, stepped forward. The law requires schools to make reasonable accommodations for students in Thomas's situation. What happened yesterday wasn't just unfair, it was potentially illegal. Principal Wilson had been hovering nearby, his forced smile now completely gone. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in my office, he suggested, clearly wanting to get the situation out of public view. Good idea, Vin agreed. Thomas, Mr. Jones, would you join us? As they walked toward the school building, the crowd of students erupted in cheers and applause. Thomas felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. Just yesterday, he had walked out of this same building in shame, thinking his future was over. Now he was walking back in with one of the biggest movie stars in the world at his side. Mrs. Patterson stepped back as they approached the entrance, unable to meet Thomas's eyes. In the principal's office, chairs were quickly arranged around the desk. Thomas sat between his father and Vin Diesel, facing Principal Wilson across the desk. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the excited buzz of students, Thomas realized that everything was about to change. The principal's office felt smaller than Thomas remembered, especially with so many people inside. Principal Wilson sat behind his desk, tugging at his collar as if it had suddenly become too tight. Mrs. Patterson had been called in and was perched stiffly on a chair in the corner, her lips pressed into a thin line. Let's get straight to the point, Vin Diesel said, leaning forward in his chair. I watched that video at least 10 times last night. What I saw was a good kid being punished for helping his family survive. Principal Wilson cleared his throat. While I appreciate your concern, Mr. Diesel, there are school policies that must be followed. Thomas has missed several classes and... Let me stop you right there, said Lisa, the lawyer. She opened a folder and placed several documents on the desk. I've reviewed your school's policies carefully. Section 4.3 clearly states that accommodations should be made for students with exceptional family circumstances. A single-parent household dependent on a family farm certainly qualifies. Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her voice sharper than usual. Accommodations are one thing, but Thomas has missed 17 classes this semester alone. Thomas's father straightened in his chair. My son wakes up at 5:30 every morning to help me before school. He stays up late doing homework. When emergencies happen on the farm, yes, he misses school, because without that farm, we lose our home. Vin nodded. You know, my own father worked multiple jobs when I was growing up. There were days I hardly saw him, but he taught me the most important lesson: family comes first. Mr. Chen, the education advocate, pulled out Thomas's academic record. Despite his absences, Thomas maintains a 3.7 GPA. His test scores are consistently in the top percentile. This suggests he's not only keeping up but excelling despite his challenges. Principal Wilson shifted uncomfortably. That may be true, but rules are rules. Mrs. Patterson was following proper procedure. Was public humiliation part of that procedure? Vin asked quietly. The room fell silent. Mrs. Patterson looked down at her hands. The video shows Thomas being embarrassed in front of his peers before he was even given a chance to explain, Lisa pointed out. That's not just bad teaching, it could be considered a hostile educational environment. Robert Jones, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Since my wife passed away 3 years ago, Thomas has been my rock. He never complains about the work, never asks for special treatment. All he wants is a chance at education." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion as his father continued. "You know what he does with his 1 day off each week? Tutors younger kids from our neighborhood. For free." Robert's voice cracked slightly. "That's the kind of person you've decided to throw away." The principal looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I may have acted hastily, based on Mrs. Paverson's recommendation." "I was wrong," Mrs. Paverson said suddenly, surprising everyone. She looked directly at Thomas for the first time. "I've been teaching for 25 years, and sometimes I forget that students have lives outside my classroom, real lives with real problems." She turned to the principal. "I want to withdraw my recommendation for expulsion." Thomas stared at her in disbelief. Principal Wilson quickly seized the opportunity. "In that case, I think we can reconsider the expulsion immediately." "That's a start," Vin said, "but not enough. Thomas shouldn't have to choose between helping his family and getting an education." Mr. Chen nodded. "We need to discuss how the school can better accommodate students in Thomas's situation." "And there should be some acknowledgement of the harm done," Lisa added. Principal Wilson looked from Vin Diesel to the lawyer, then to Thomas and his father. Outside, they could hear the excited chatter of students still gathered, waiting to see what would happen. "What exactly are you proposing?" the principal asked cautiously. Vin Diesel smiled. "I have some ideas. But first," he turned to Thomas, "I'd like to hear what you think would make this right." Everyone in the room looked at Thomas, waiting for his answer. Thomas looked around the room at all the faces waiting for his answer. He hadn't expected to be put on the spot like this. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed. Yesterday he had been expelled, and today one of the biggest movie stars in the world was asking what he wanted. "I don't want special treatment," Thomas said finally. "But I do want things to be fair, not just for me, but for other kids like me too." Vin nodded encouragingly. "There are at least 5 other students from farming families in this school," Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger. "And some kids have sick parents they take care of, or younger siblings. We all want to learn, but sometimes life gets in the way." Principal Wilson leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Maybe flexible deadlines for assignments when there are family emergencies, or recorded lessons we could watch when we can't make it to class. Just some understanding that we're trying our best." Mr. Chen was nodding and taking notes. These are reasonable accommodations that many schools already implement. Outside the principal's office, word had spread through the school about what was happening. By lunchtime, local news vans had started arriving. Parents were calling the school, and social media was exploding with #JusticeForThomas hashtags. The school secretary knocked on the door. "Principal Wilson, there's a crowd gathering in the parking lot. The mayor is here, along with about half the town." Principal Wilson's eyes widened. "The mayor? And the local news," the secretary added. Mrs. Patterson looked out the window. "There must be 100 people out there." Thomas recognized many of the faces in the crowd, neighbors, other farming families, his father's friends from town. They held handmade signs saying "Support our farm kids" and "Education for all." "I think this has become bigger than just Thomas," Lisa said. "It's touched a nerve in your community." Principal Wilson sighed. "I can see that. Perhaps we should address the crowd." As they all filed out of the office, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from his friend Daniel. "The whole town is here. Even old Mr. Peterson closed his hardware store to come support you." The crowd cheered when they saw Thomas emerge from the building. His father put a protective arm around his shoulders. Thomas had never seen anything like this in their small town. The mayor stepped forward with a microphone someone had set up. "Our community stands behind our farming families. They feed us, they support our economy, and their children deserve the same educational opportunities as everyone else." More cheers erupted from the crowd. Vin Diesel surprised everyone by stepping up to the microphone next. "I didn't come here for publicity," he said, his deep voice carrying across the parking lot. "I came because I saw something wrong that needed to be fixed. But what I'm seeing now is something right, a community coming together to support one of their own." He motioned for Thomas to join him. Hesitantly, Thomas stepped forward. "This young man doesn't just want justice for himself," Vin continued. "He wants to make sure all students with family responsibilities get a fair chance. That's the kind of thinking that changes things for the better." Thomas spotted Mrs. Patterson standing to the side, watching with a thoughtful expression. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod. The mayor handed Thomas the microphone. Thomas had never spoken in front of so many people before. He took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice shaky at first. "I never expected any of this. I just want to finish school so I can help my dad make our farm better someday. But there are lots of kids like me who are trying to balance family and school. We shouldn't have to choose between them." The crowd applauded, and Thomas gained confidence. "My mom used to say that education is the key that unlocks doors, but some of us need help reaching that key. That's all we're asking for, just a little understanding and flexibility so we can reach it too." More applause followed, louder this time. Thomas saw his father wiping away a tear, and something warm swelled in his chest. For the first time since his expulsion, he felt hopeful about what might come next. The next morning, Thomas woke up to the sound of his father talking with someone downstairs. He glanced at his alarm clock, 6:15 a.m. Who could be visiting so early? He pulled on a t-shirt and headed down to find Vin Diesel sitting at their kitchen table, drinking coffee with his father. Maps and papers were spread across the table. "Morning, Thomas," Vin said with a smile. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by early. Your dad and I have been talking about some ideas." Thomas rubbed his eyes, still not quite believing that this famous actor was sitting in their worn-out kitchen, looking completely at home. "What kind of ideas?" Thomas asked, pouring himself some orange juice. Robert pushed a paper toward his son. "Vin here has some pretty amazing plans. Tell him, Vin." The actor leaned forward. "Yesterday at the school got me thinking. Your situation isn't unique. There are kids all over the country trying to balance family responsibilities with education. So I've decided to start something new, the Rural Education Support Program." Thomas sat down, his orange juice forgotten. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means funding for schools to create flexible programs for students like you. Recording equipment for classrooms so missed lessons can be watched later. Tutoring support. Even small scholarships to help ease financial pressure." Robert nodded. "And he wants to start right here with our school." Thomas looked at the papers on the table and realized they were architectural drawings. "What are these?" "That's the other part," Vin said, his eyes lighting up. "A community learning center built right here in town. A place with computers, internet access, and study spaces where kids can come after school or on weekends. Especially helpful for families without good internet at home." "But that would cost." Thomas trailed off, unable to even guess the amount. "A lot," Vin finished for him. "But I've been fortunate in my career, and my production company has been looking for meaningful community projects to support." Thomas's father looked at his son. "What do you think?" Before Thomas could answer, there was a knock at the door. Robert went to answer it and returned with Mrs. Patterson. Thomas straightened in his chair, surprised to see his teacher in their home. "Sorry to intrude so early," she said, looking uncomfortable. "I asked around town for your address." She nodded politely to Vin Diesel before turning back to Thomas. "I wanted to speak with you, privately, if possible." Thomas glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "We can talk on the porch," Thomas suggested. Outside, the morning air was cool and fresh. Mrs. Patterson took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been teaching for 25 years, she began. "And somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started teaching in the first place, to help young people build better lives." She looked out over the farm fields stretching behind the house. "Your speech yesterday made me realize how rigid I've become." Thomas listened quietly, unsure how to respond. "I spent last night thinking about all the students I might have failed over the years by not understanding their circumstances." Mrs. Patterson's voice grew softer. "My own father was a farmer, you know. He struggled to keep me in school. I should have remembered that." She turned to face Thomas directly. "I'm sorry, Thomas. Truly sorry." "Thank you," Thomas said simply. "I've already spoken with Principal Wilson. I'll be leading a committee to implement new policies for students with family responsibilities." She hesitated. And I was hoping you might join the committee. We need your perspective. Thomas was stunned. Just days ago, this woman had gotten him expelled. Now she was asking for his help. I'd like that, he said finally. Mrs. Patterson smiled, the first genuine smile Thomas had ever seen from her. Good, very good. She glanced back at the house. You have quite the advocate in there. Not many people would fly their helicopter to a small-town school to right a wrong. Thomas smiled. He says his next movie might even be about rural communities and education. As they walked back inside, Thomas felt a strange sense of peace. The expulsion that had seemed like the end of his world had somehow become the beginning of something much bigger, not just for him, but for students everywhere facing the same challenges. 6 months passed like a whirlwind. The small farming town had changed in ways nobody could have imagined before Thomas's expulsion and Vin Diesel's unexpected arrival. On a bright Saturday morning, crowds gathered for the grand opening of the new Rural Education Support Center. The modern building stood proudly at the edge of town, its glass front reflecting the clear blue sky. A helicopter landed in the nearby field, now a proper helipad, and Vin Diesel stepped out to cheers from the waiting crowd. Thomas stood at the entrance with his father, both wearing suits borrowed from the town's only formal wear shop. Robert straightened his son's tie nervously. You ready for this? He asked. Thomas nodded, though his stomach was filled with butterflies. So much had happened since that awful day when he'd been expelled. Now he was about to give a speech to open a center that would help hundreds of students like him. The mayor cut the ribbon with giant scissors while cameras flashed. Inside, the center was even more impressive than the plans had promised. Computer labs with the latest technology, quiet study rooms, and a large community space filled the first floor. Upstairs were classrooms where students could catch up on missed work and connect with online tutors. This place is going to change lives, Thomas whispered to his father. Principal Wilson approached them, looking more relaxed than Thomas had ever seen him. The events of the past months had changed him too. The first group of students starts Monday, he said proudly. 20 kids from farming families, plus another 15 who have other family responsibilities. We've already got teachers volunteering their time. Mrs. Patterson joined them, carrying a stack of brochures about the new school policies she had helped create. The Family Responsibilities Policy now offered flexible deadlines, recorded lessons, and personalized learning plans for students who needed them. Thomas, she said, the committee wants you to say a few words before Vin speaks. Thomas followed her to the small stage that had been set up in the main hall. Looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces, classmates, neighbors, town officials, but also many strangers. News of the center had spread, bringing visitors from neighboring counties and even some state education officials. Vin Diesel gave Thomas a thumbs up from the front row as Thomas stepped up to the microphone. 6 months ago, Thomas began, his voice only slightly shaky, I thought my education was over when I got expelled for missing school to help on our farm. I never imagined it would lead to this. He gestured around the new building. I was just one kid with a problem, but it turned out lots of kids had the same problem. The crowd listened attentively as he continued. This center isn't just about buildings and computers. It's about understanding that education needs to work for everyone, including those of us with responsibilities outside school. It's about saying that where you come from, a farm, a single-parent home, any tough situation, shouldn't decide where you can go in life. Thomas spotted his friend Daniel in the crowd, grinning and recording the speech on his phone. The same kind of video that had started everything. I want to thank Vin Diesel not just for funding this center, but for listening and understanding when nobody else would. And I want to thank my dad, who taught me that working hard for your family is never something to be ashamed of. Robert wiped away a tear as the crowd applauded. After the ceremony, as people toured the new facilities, Vin pulled Thomas aside. I've got something else for you, he said, handing Thomas an envelope. Inside was a college acceptance letter along with a full scholarship offer. How did you? Thomas began. I just made a few calls, Vin said with a smile. The rest was all you, your grades, your character, your story. They want students like you. Thomas stared at the letter, his future suddenly opening up before him in ways he never thought possible. You can still help your dad on the farm when needed, Vin added. The scholarship covers housing during breaks too. As the sun set over the new center that evening, Thomas stood outside with his father, watching the golden light reflect off the windows. "Mom would be so proud," Robert said quietly. Thomas nodded, knowing that what had started as his darkest day had somehow become the beginning of his brightest future.